Chapter 21 White Lotus with Green Tea. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Among the group of residents, Aunt Lin was still the most vocal. Did you guys see the news? The government's got this snowstorm under control. No need to worry, they'll sort it out. Hey, if anyone needs anything, let's all pitch in where we can. It's just a snowstorm, it'll pass, no need to go crazy hoarding supplies. But she didn't get much of a response 2 days in, and with no end to the storm in sight, people were starting to freak out. Fang Yuqing texted Zhang Yi again. Hey Zhang Yi, you doing okay? Zhang Yi frowned. Fang Yuqing probably thought Xiaohu was taking care of her, he wasn't buying her concern for a second. I'm fine. Oh, okay. Fang Yuqing sounded a little bummed, but she quickly followed up with, we're running low on food. I remember you stocked up. Could you spare some? I'll treat you to dinner sometime. Winking face. Zhang Yi smirked, he knew she had an angle. He remembered that when he went shopping with them last time, Fang Yuqing and Lin Canning had grabbed some stuff too, not as much as he did, but enough to last a couple of days. That dinner thing was ages ago. I didn't keep much at home. Actually, I'm running pretty low myself. Fang Yuqing wasn't giving up that easily. Then just a few packs of instant noodles, right? You're in charge of the warehouse, you can't tell me you're going hungry. Zhang Yi was playing hardball. Out of instant noodles, too. Check it out, this is all I've got to eat. He snapped a photo of an Australian lobster and a steak on his table and sent it to Fang Yuqing. Fang Yuqing saw the picture and her eyebrows shot up. Damn Zhang Yi. What's your deal? Are you trying to make me jealous? Her best friend, Lin Canning, popped her head out from under the blanket next to her. It was so cold they were sharing a bed. When Lin Canning saw the food in the photo, her eyes lit up like Christmas trees. These two hardly ever cooked, they usually ordered takeout or had guys take them out, but with the city snowed in, they were starving. All they had were instant noodles and canned goods they normally wouldn't touch. Seeing Zhang Yi feasting on lobster and steak, they were both pissed and envious, pissed because Zhang Yi was hogging it all to himself. Lin Canning chimed in, dripping with sarcasm, wow, that's low, Zhang Yi. You've got that kind of food in the house and you didn't even think of you. And he used to say he liked you. Honestly, he's such a fake. Fang Yuqing was already annoyed. It wasn't the first time Zhang Yi had sent her pictures like this. She knew he was trying to get a rise out of her. Still, she figured Zhang Yi still had a thing for her and was trying to get her to give in. Please. A little bit of food and he thinks I'll become his girlfriend. Zhang Yi, you're so clueless. Fang Yuqing scoffed. As a master manipulator, she had an image to maintain, but even she couldn't hide the longing in her eyes when she looked at Zhang Yi's photo. Lin Canning totally got it. Yuqing, why don't you just tell Zhang Yi you'll have dinner with him, but he has to bring the food. That way, you save face and get to eat delicious lobster and steak. He'll jump at the chance, I bet. Fang Yuqing frowned, considering it. Zhang Yi was just a backup plan, nothing more. Sure, he was good-looking and had some money, but he wasn't exactly her dream guy. Normally, she'd never lower herself, but right now, she really couldn't stomach another can of beans. Fine, I guess I can give him a chance to take me out, Fang Yuqing said, trying to sound unimpressed. She grabbed her phone and texted Zhang Yi. Zhang Yi, it's been a while. Why don't you come over and we can all have dinner together tonight? Zhang Yi laughed when he saw the message. You want to invite me to dinner? Sure, thanks. That made Fang Yuqing's blood boil. She might have just been cold. She turned to Lin Canning, fuming. That guy Zhang Yi is unbelievable. I gave him a chance to treat me, and he expects me to foot the bill. Lin Canning was taken aback. She hadn't expected Zhang Yi, who used to worship the ground Fang Yuqing walked on, to suddenly pull a 180. Weird, was the doormat finally standing up for himself? Fang Yuqing threw her phone aside in disgust. Zhang Yi, I was going to keep him around as a backup. Now he's getting bumped way down the list. I'm so over him. From now on, I'm not saying another word to him. He could beg me and it wouldn't matter. Lin Caning, ever the instigator, piled on. Exactly. He needs to check himself. Trying to chase you but being so cheap. That's a guy who's destined to be single forever. That they spent the next few minutes trashing Zhang Yi. Every so often, Fang Yuqing would glance at her phone, expecting an apology, but Zhang Yi didn't text, and her face darkened. Then Lin Caning had a bright idea. She secretly texted Zhang Yi. Zhang Yi, why are you so dumb? Yuqing's not happy. Do you know how big of a problem that is? Zhang Yi glanced at the message without thinking. Reading messages from random chat groups had become his favorite way to pass the time. After all, what's more entertaining than watching humanity crumble in the apocalypse? When he saw it was from Lin Caning, he just laughed. Two-faced much? You two are a real piece of work. Zhang Yi knew their game. Lin Caning was always the one setting up Fang Yuqing. Fang Yuqing needed to keep up the whole pure goddess act, so Lin Caning was the one who hinted at gifts and encouraged guys to spend money on Fang Yuqing's behalf. Chapter 22. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Zhang Yi played dumb. What? I didn't do anything wrong. Lin Caning shot back, are you dense? With this blizzard locking down the city, we're practically out of food. And you're sitting on a pile of goodies? This is your chance to score points with Yuqing. If I were you, I'd be sending over steaks, lobsters, the whole shebang. Wow her, and you're golden. Reading Lin Caning's message, Zhang Yi could practically see the greedy look on that gold digger's face. He just scoffed, isn't this just begging with extra steps? The crazy thing is, they want to eat, but they have to pretend they're doing you a favor. Like Zhang Yi giving them food is actually giving them an opportunity. That kind of audacity just made Zhang Yi want to slap them silly. Leeches. Zhang Yi decided to have some fun with these two-faced users, he typed, but we're running low on food here. Barely enough for me. Lin Caning frowned, immediately scolding, idiot. The blizzard could last days. Starve yourself for a couple of meals, then win over Yuqing. Huge payoff. You can't even part with that little bit. You're clearly not serious about Yuqing. Zhang Yi laughed even harder. They were playing good cop, bad cop, trying to manipulate him like he was a puppet. Too bad for them, Zhang Yi was back from the dead. He saw right through their act, facing Lin Caning's BS. He just replied okay and tossed his phone aside, ignoring her. Lin Caning saw the single word and lost it. Okay. What the heck does okay mean? I'm giving you advice here, and that's your response. Get over here with that food now. I want steak and lobster. Lin Caning was a total foodie, and she hadn't eaten anything decent in days. Seeing Zhang Yi feast was torture. She'd planned to use Fang Yuqing's name to get Zhang Yi to send her everything delicious, but things weren't going according to plan at all. That one okay was about to break her. Could it be? He was over Yuqing. No, no way. Lin Caning remembered how Zhang Yi had treated Fang Yuqing over the past few years, and immediately shook her head. He's just having a temporary lapse. Furious, Lin Caning went to Fang Yuqing and spun a more persuasive tale. Of course, she told Fang Yuqing she was trying to get supplies from Zhang Yi for her. Fang Yuqing's face was cold. Humph, Zhang Yi? Who's that? Don't mention him to me again. Now that Zhang Yi wanted to be her lapdog again, he was going to have to apologize for the last few days, and beg for forgiveness at a high price. Lin Caning nudged Fang Yuqing. So Zhang Yi's being difficult. Don't you have other guys chasing you around? They had plenty of guys in the community who worked in warehouses, like Zhou Peng, who was totally into her. Fang Yuqing knew exactly who Lin Caning was talking about. She curled her lip in disgust. Zhou Peng wasn't even a backup option. Even though he used to work at Walmart, Zhou Peng didn't even own an apartment in the city. He was still renting. Fang Yuqing just used him for what she could get, but she didn't like him at all. Lin Caning reasoned. It's freezing out and snowing like crazy. We can't go out to shop. Why don't we use him for now and get him to run errands for us? Fang Yuqing's eyes flickered. Lin Caning had a point, so she sent a message to Zhou Peng. In less than 5 minutes, Zhou Peng was there, carrying a bag of food, working at the Walmart warehouse, he could snag discounted goods on the regular, so he had a little stash at home. When Fang Yuqing gave him the word, Zhou Ping felt like he'd been injected with pure adrenaline. He'd picked out all the best stuff and brought it to her. He even puffed out his chest and declared, "Yuqing, you name it, I'll do it. You know I'd do anything for you." Fang Yuqing gave Zhou Ping a rare, sweet smile. "Thanks, Zhou Ping. You're the best." She sent Zhou Ping on his way with some honeyed words. Then, back inside, her face changed instantly. "Pfft, you wish you had a shot with me, loser. Not in this lifetime." The atmosphere in the building was getting weirder and weirder, with temperatures plummeting. Even with the AC running full blast, the temperature inside homes was below freezing. Southerners in the city couldn't handle it at all, and since they weren't in the habit of stocking up, refrigerators were empty. Even though Aunt Lin was still insisting everything would be fine and the blizzard would pass, everyone was worried. But Zhang Yi was watching it all, secretly loving it. He was totally prepared for the end of the world. His life was actually better than before. He was like an outsider, just watching the drama unfold. After Zhang Yi gave Chen Zhenghao and his brother a beatdown, they were keeping their distance. At least for now, they knew Zhang Yi's place wasn't an easy target. Plus, Chen Zhenghao's leg was pretty much useless. Without a hospital, he'd be permanently disabled in a few days. As for those punks, they were all down with colds and fevers after getting soaked. With no way to stay warm, they were dragging around their sick bodies, probably going to die from the fever before they ran out of food. Back home, Zhang Yi was gaming and watching the group chats to kill time. When he felt like it, he'd work out. He had tons of fitness equipment at home, all high-end brands, or he'd check out those random manuals he'd downloaded. The Barefoot Doctor's Manual, the Militia Training Manual, that kind of thing. Better to be prepared and know that stuff, just in case. It could save your life. It was snowing hard outside. The sky was dark and cloudy, making it hard to tell day from night. On the morning of the third day, Zhang Yi got out of bed, looked at the clock, and hugged a delicious roast duck. Almost time for the fun to start, Zhang Yi said casually, and just then, the group chat on his phone completely exploded. Chapter 23: Water and Power Outages. You are listening at novelfull.audio. 3 days after the initial chaos, the real fun began. Zhang Yi, knowing what was coming, stayed up all night, eager to see the show. The setup was simple. The entire Yuelu community lost power. Almost immediately, the water supply failed due to the power outage. Every household was left without water. This was exactly what Zhang Yi had expected. In the early days of the apocalypse, no one could predict how long the extreme cold would last. Officials were doing their best to manage the crisis, but by the third day, it was clear that manpower alone couldn't fix this. Major hydroelectric plants were shutting down due to the cold, and thermal power plants couldn't operate without staff. Once cities across the country exhausted their stored electricity, outages became inevitable. Only a few nuclear plants were likely still running, and their power was reserved for official use. The water and power cuts plunged ordinary people's lives into chaos. Zhang Yi checked his phone and saw countless messages in his group chats. Anyone have power? Our power's out. And the water's gone too. What's happening? No water or power here either. It's freezing, can't use the AC, can't use a heater. How are we supposed to live? Why aren't the authorities doing anything? People are going to freeze to death. Zhang Yi shook his head. The authorities were overwhelmed. Survival depended on self-reliance. He knew the real doomsday was beginning now. Without electricity and food, mass casualties were inevitable. Zhang Yi looked around his apartment, a sense of relief washing over him. His home was warm and secure, stocked with an endless supply of goods in his personal dimension. Panic gripped the community's group chat. When will this snow stop? The AC's useless, it's below zero in here. People will freeze to death. The water's out, can we at least melt snow? We're almost out of food, and the snow's blocking the supermarket. What are we going to do? People started tagging Aunt Lin. Aunt Lin, you said everything was fine. Yeah, we listened to you and didn't stock up. What now? When are we getting rescued? Give us some news. Aunt Lin was more anxious than anyone, she had insider information from the neighborhood committee. This blizzard is global, a once-in-a-lifetime disaster. This might be another mass extinction, the end of the world. The government is trying, but they can't possibly help over 1 billion people. Several major Chinese cities have already fallen. We have to rely on ourselves to survive. Stock up on everything, especially food and heating. I've already started going door to door asking for supplies, in the neighborhood committee's name. Isn't that wrong? Wrong. If I don't, my family will freeze or starve in 3 days. I can't worry about that. I don't know how many people will die in this disaster. I have to protect my family first. Yeah, we have to get more supplies while we can. Survival is all that matters now. Aunt Lin trembled as she read the messages in the neighborhood committee group. Despite the sub-zero temperature, cold sweat poured down her face. She was buried under 3 thick quilts, barely able to breathe, but afraid to move. The room felt like an icebox. Her grandson, Xiaohu, asked from under the covers, "Grandma, why is it so cold? When are Mom and Dad coming home?" Aunt Lin's heart sank. She had spoken to her son and daughter-in-law earlier. They were trapped in their rented apartment in another city, their situation no better than hers. I have to protect us. We have to survive. Aunt Lin bit her lip, a fierce look in her eyes. It's okay, Xiaohu. Mom and Dad will be back soon. After comforting Xiaohu, Aunt Lin picked up her phone and typed a message in the community group. Everyone, this is temporary. Water and power outages are expected in this cold. Don't worry, crews are working on it. The authorities have issued a notice. The neighborhood committee will manage community resources during this crisis. We expect everyone's cooperation. Failure to cooperate will have serious consequences. We will have the police investigate. Aunt Lin's words were harsh, the residents were outraged, the neighborhood committee was threatening them instead of helping, but they were also scared, and no one dared to speak out. Zhang Yi read Aunt Lin's message and smirked. He knew she was lying. In his previous life, she had used this tactic to steal supplies, but he didn't care enough to expose her. What did he care if his neighbors lived or died? Zhang Yi turned on the TV and resumed his game. No water or power. He had spare batteries, engines, fuel, and solid alcohol. He had stockpiled 500 tons of water, plus thousands of tons of bottled water and beverages, and he could always melt snow. He had plenty of fresh water and energy. Chapter 24 Aunt Lin's Threat. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Zhang Yi was living the good life, playing video games and snacking on imported treats. Meanwhile, all of Tianhai City, or more like 99% of the world, was experiencing a water and power outage. The water issue was the easier one to deal with. If you were desperate, you could always go out and dig up snow to melt for water, but the power outage, that was the real killer. Modern folks are soft. Exposing them to sub-zero temperatures could actually kill them. Zhang Yi's neighbors were whining in the homeowners group chat, fear driving them to huddle together for warmth and hoping someone would offer a glimmer of hope. Chen Zhenghao, the guy whose leg Zhang Yi broke, was dragging himself around, practically freezing to death in his own apartment. He was already injured, and now he had to survive in these crazy low temperatures. It was a double whammy, and his little crew of karamis was in even worse shape, even though Zhang Yi just hosed them down that one time at this temperature, with no heat at all. The indoor temperature was steadily dropping to match the outdoor temperature, hitting 50, 60 below. Several of them were burning up with fevers, some reaching 102, 104 degrees. Since they hadn't bothered to stock up on medicine, they had no ibuprofen at home, and in this weather, there was no way they were going out to buy any, so, they were stuck toughing it out, which was exactly why Zhang Yi hadn't killed them outright back then. Letting them freeze to death in slow-motion despair was way more satisfying than a quick execution. Back inside, Zhang Yi was chilling on his carpet, totally absorbed in his game. Outside, it was a blizzard, the north wind howling and the snow coming down hard. Inside, it was a balmy 80 degrees, lights blazing, with plenty of food, drinks, and entertainment if you had to find something wrong. maybe it was the lack of a woman to keep Zhang Yi company. But Zhang Yi wasn't some hormone-addled idiot. He'd had his fill of women in his past life, and now he was all about prioritizing his own safety and comfort. No way he was letting anyone into his safe house unless he was 100% sure. In the apocalypse, you just couldn't trust anyone. He'd seen a woman beat her husband to death over a pack of instant noodles. Just then, Zhang Yi's phone lit up again. He picked it up, curious, and saw that Aunt Lin had tagged him in the homeowners group. Due to the current blizzard, everyone's life is greatly affected. According to official notices, the snow will continue for a short period. In order for everyone to overcome the difficulties together and live with dignity in these difficult times. From now on, the neighborhood committee will collect the supplies from each household and distribute them uniformly. This is an official order, please cooperate. Anyone who's selfish and disobeys the organization's arrangements will be dealt with afterward. Don't think you're too good to listen to us. Remember, your family has weaknesses. Zhang Yi smirked, same old song and dance as in his past life. As a member of the neighborhood committee, Aunt Lin didn't have much real power, but she had access to more information than the average person. She must have figured out that the world was ending and that the government was paralyzed in Tianhai City. That's why she was trying to use a mix of sweet-talking and intimidation to get everyone to hand over their supplies, but Aunt Lin's methods were pretty weak. After all, she was just some old lady with a half-baked education. Anyone with half a brain could see that something was fishy about what she was saying. Even if the government was enforcing rationing, they wouldn't issue an order like that. Still, there were over 50 families in their building, and there were bound to be some scaredy cats who'd cave to Aunt Lin's demands out of fear. Zhang Yi wasn't planning on getting involved. He just wanted to watch the drama unfold. Sure enough, Aunt Lin's tough guy act about confiscating everyone's supplies finally rubbed some people the wrong way. Wang Min, who lived on the 15th floor and was also Zhang Yi's colleague, was known as a thrifty housewife who often brought stuff home from the warehouse. The neighbors knew this. If Aunt Lin was collecting supplies from every family, their family was definitely on the list. Wang Min chimed in. The doors are shut because of the snow. No one can get out. There's barely enough food for each household. You still want to collect it and redistribute it uniformly? Does that even make sense? Another homeowner, Sun Jichao, added, everyone's struggling, and it's not easy to save up some food. You still want to confiscate it? That's just too much. Aunt Lin gritted her teeth and slammed her finger on the voice button. I've already said it, these are extraordinary times, and they call for extraordinary measures. The snowstorm will pass soon, so don't worry. We're just asking everyone to redistribute their supplies. There are a lot of people who don't have anything to eat right now. Are you really going to be that selfish? Think about your neighbors. Some people had stockpiled supplies at home, while others were running low, so, naturally, those who were running low were all about supporting Aunt Lin. That's right, we're all neighbors. What's wrong with helping each other out at a time like this? It's just some food and drinks. It's not like we can't afford it on a normal day. The situation is just a little weird these past couple of days. This is an organizational decision. If you don't comply, you'll have to deal with the consequences. The WeChat group turned into a battlefield, with two sides going at it. Zhang Yi didn't say a word, and neither did Goody Two-Shoes Fang Yuqing or Lin Caning. They still had plenty of supplies at home, but with their personalities, there was no way they would ever hand them over. Zhang Yi's plan to watch the show was quickly interrupted. Even though he hadn't said anything, Aunt Lin took the initiative to send him a private message. Xiao Zhang, you work in the warehouse. You must have a ton of food and drinks at home, right? I still remember you buying 3 big carts last time. Now that everyone's in trouble, it's time for you to step up. Don't worry, we'll definitely pay you back once the snowstorm is over. Everyone will remember your generosity. Aunt Lin started by building up pressure in the WeChat group, hoping to scare some of the more timid residents. Then, she started targeting people one by one. If she could trick even one family into giving up some supplies, that would be enough to keep her and her grandson alive for a few more days. And Zhang Yi, the Walmart warehouse supervisor, was now firmly in Aunt Lin's sights. Chapter 25. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Zhang Yi just smirked. In his past life, he'd seriously underestimated how bad the snowstorm would be. Thinking he could get in good with the neighbors, he pulled out some of his prepper stash. Big mistake. Instead of being thanked, they figured he had tons more stuff. The result: they broke down his door, killed him, and used him for food. And that old bat, Aunt Lin? She was in on it. A smile played on his lips, and he said lazily, "That's great, we're all out of food here. Aunt Lin, once you've collected everything, I'll help you with the heavy lifting." Aunt Lin practically choked with rage, cursing him under her breath. "Yeah, right. Who do you think you're fooling? You're loaded with supplies. Humph, after working in that warehouse for so many years, don't tell me you never helped yourself." That she was so sure because Zhang Yi used to get neighbors deals on stuff from the Walmart warehouse, like damaged packaging or almost expired food, sold super cheap. As an employee, he got first dibs. Sometimes, the warehouse would even hand stuff out as employee perks. Aunt Lin's face was turning purple. She gritted her teeth, refusing to give up. She knew Zhang Yi was the big prize. If she could just get him to crack, the two of them could score a ton of supplies, enough to survive for another week, at least. Taking a deep breath, Aunt Lin tried to sound as sweet and reasonable as possible. "Now, Xiao Zhang, don't mess with your auntie. Everyone knows you're a supervisor at the Walmart warehouse. You must have plenty of food and drink at home. This is an order, you have to listen. You'd be doing this for everyone, and everyone will remember you for it. Just be a good boy, give everything you have to your auntie." Led by example, Zhang Yi grabbed a toothpick, picking at his teeth. He'd had roast leg of lamb for lunch, and it was a little stuck. He said casually, "I'm telling you, we're all out. We're flat broke, down to our last dime. Hey, Aunt Lin, how about you give me a few packs of ramen? As a member of the neighborhood committee, you should be stepping up." Zhang Yi's voice dripped with sarcasm. Seeing that she was getting nowhere, Aunt Lin dropped the act, her voice dropped, and she became stern. "Zhang Yi. You want to play hardball, huh? Do you think I'm just talking to you personally? I'm speaking on behalf of the organization. If you refuse to hand over the supplies, you are going against the organization. I will make sure you pay for it." Zhang Yi scoffed. "Yeah, right. Representing the organization. You're just some glorified busybody. You're just on the neighborhood watch. You're not even a civil servant. That crap might work on the old folks, but don't try to play me like a fool. Do what you want, I'll be waiting for you at home." Zhang Yi laid it all out there, exposing Aunt Lin for who she was. Neighborhood watch folks are just volunteers, they don't have any real authority, and Aunt Lin was just a low-level gopher, not even a team leader. Not that he'd care even if she was a big shot. After he finished yelling at Aunt Lin, Zhang Yi hung up and blocked her number. He didn't have time for that old windbag's rants. His move nearly gave Aunt Lin a stroke. Zhang Yi had defied her again and again, stomping on her ego. How could she, a self-proclaimed leader of the community, take this? "Zhang Yi, you son of a... I want to kill you." Aunt Lin screamed in fury, but she was all bark and no bite. She was barely holding it together herself. She couldn't actually do anything to Zhang Yi. She thought about kicking Zhang Yi out of the building's chat group, but that wouldn't hurt him at all. She thought about calling everyone in the group to condemn Zhang Yi, but then everyone would know that Zhang Yi was refusing to hand over his supplies. And if everyone did the same, she wouldn't be able to swindle anyone. Basically, she was powerless to do anything to Zhang Yi at that moment. The more she thought about it, the angrier she got, the more frustrated she felt. But she had no choice but to swallow her pride. Right now, her top priority was to scam the neighbors. She had to rip them off for everything they had before they wised up. Over the next couple of days, Aunt Lin used a combination of sweet talk and threats, managing to get a few families to fork over some supplies. But not everyone was stupid. In the apocalypse, everyone's number one concern was survival. Some people gave Aunt Lin the cold shoulder, others were more aggressive, flat out cursing her out when she came asking for handouts. As for Chen Zhenghao and Su Hao, Those guys were not to be messed with. She didn't even dare knock on their door. Zhang Yi saw it all through his security cameras, but he was focused on enjoying his meals, and didn't want to meddle in other people's affairs. It had been 5 days since the ice storm hit. Normal people usually only stocked up on food for 3 to 5 days. Since some people here worked at the warehouse, they had a little more at home, but with the extreme cold, they needed fuel to heat their homes. Food ran out faster than usual. Over the last few days, the building's chat group had slowly begun to turn hostile. The residents, who'd originally been calm and waiting for the authorities, had started to panic due to lack of food and heat, especially those who had been tricked by Aunt Lin, and finally began to demand how the supplies would be distributed. At 25 #1 unit 1502 Lin Chuanxia, Aunt Lin, will the supplies you promised be distributed now that they are taken away? Our family is completely out of food. It's been 2 days, please bring us some. That's right, we agreed to distribute them equally so everyone could have something to eat. That the building residents all began to yell and complain. Aunt Lin seemed to have disappeared without a word. Of course, she saw the messages, but she had no intention of giving anything back. In the whole building, only she and Zhang Yi knew what was really going on. The outside world had descended into chaos. Only with supplies could people survive, otherwise they would die. She hugged her grandson, curled up in her 5-layer quilt, and said, "How can I give back the supplies I swindled with so much difficulty?" Chapter 26 Black Eat Black. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Seeing Aunt Lin wasn't answering, no matter how much they yelled, the neighbors started catching on that she'd been playing them. The chat group blew up with angry messages aimed at her, but Aunt Lin, having already decided to scam her neighbors, wasn't about to start caring about what they thought of her. She couldn't care less about the insults. However, someone else had their eyes on those ill-gotten gains, like Chen Zhenghao, a real operator. Even though it had been 5 days since the disaster, nobody really knew what was going on outside, so, things hadn't escalated to the point of all-out brawls for supplies. Zhang Yi remembered Chen Zhenghao leading a gang to rob and even kill people for their stuff, but right now, he hadn't tried just straight-up stealing supplies from the neighbors. After all, even a lowlife like him had some sense. Even Zhang Yi, who'd shot him in the leg, hadn't been enough to make him risk another home invasion without a sure thing. Now, their own supplies were dwindling fast. Nobody in this community was a big prepper. They had some beer in the fridge, but it had been frozen solid for days. Besides, it wouldn't fill anyone up. If you wanted to drink it, you had to chip it out of a block of ice. Aunt Lin's little scheme caught his eye. She'd been talking about collecting supplies for a uniform distribution. He'd scoffed at it at the time, but now it was clear that she'd gotten her hands on a bunch of stuff by sweet-talking the neighbors, which gave him a perfect excuse to take it all. Even after the thaw, when things went back to normal, Aunt Lin wouldn't dare make a fuss, so Chen Zhenghao grabbed his phone and called Aunt Lin. She was at home, happily munching on cookies with her grandson, Xiaohu. The instant noodles were for the short call time each day. When she could boil water, the phone started ringing. "Grandma, phone." Xiaohu pointed. Aunt Lin scoffed, her eyes full of contempt. It had to be those neighbors she'd ripped off. She didn't feel an ounce of guilt for those suckers. She thought they were all idiots, but when she saw Chen Zhenghao's name on the caller ID, a look of fear washed over her face. Chen Zhenghao. What does he want? Chen Zhenghao was a notorious thug, with plenty of muscle and rumored connections. She was just a small-time neighborhood officer. She couldn't afford to mess with him. Aunt Lin answered the phone. Chen Zhenghao's voice came on. "Hey, Aunt Lin. You're doing a bang-up job getting all the neighbor supplies into your hands." Aunt Lin tensed up at the word supplies. She coughed. "Well, as the neighborhood committee secretary, it's my duty to coordinate and manage supplies for everyone." Chen Zhenghao sneered. "Yeah, right. My family's running low, so hurry up and bring everything over here." Aunt Lin's face froze. She hadn't expected this goon to come knocking for a shakedown. She seemed to have forgotten that she had been scamming the neighbors. Though she was scared to death of Chen Zhenghao, she wasn't about to give up the supplies she'd stolen, not with her and her grandson's lives on the line. She gritted her teeth and said, "I still need to sort everything out. And some people haven't turned in their stuff yet, so I can't distribute it yet." Chen Zhenghao was losing patience. This old broad was really asking for it, trying to weasel her way out of it. He barked, "Old woman, don't play games with me. You've been stashing everything, haven't you? I'm telling you, you better hand it over, or I'll come and get it myself." Aunt Lin's face went white. She was trembling, at a loss for words. She was a bully who folded to the strong. She was quick to take advantage of ordinary people and boss them around, but how could she handle someone like Chen Zhenghao? She tried to sound brave. "What are you going to do? I'm warning you, don't get any ideas. I'm the secretary of the neighborhood committee." Chen Zhenghao laughed even harder. "Bah, you're nothing. You think you're something special. If you don't give it to me, I'm coming to get it." He hung up, because it was so cold. He had all his boys crashing at his place. It was warmer with more bodies, and a lot of them had gotten sick after Zhang Yi hosed them down, so they needed taking care of. Plus, Chen Zhenghao wasn't a complete idiot. He realized things were changing fast, so he was keeping his crew close. Having muscle around gave him the edge. But all those guys needed to eat. He hung up the phone, called one of his boys, and a group of them charged toward Aunt Lin's place. Chen Zhenghao leaned on a mop handle like a cane and carried a baseball bat in the other hand. He headed to Aunt Lin's door, looking for trouble. Zhang Yi saw it all on his security camera. He was sitting on the TV with his feet up on the coffee table, munching potato chips and watching TV. "Heh, looks like a dogfight's about to break out." He grinned. It was only the 5th day of the apocalypse, and he was already getting a show. And both sides were people he hated. Zhang Yi was in a great mood. Then, he thought about those stupid neighbors Aunt Lin had scammed, based on his memories of his past life, and what he knew about these people, that even after this, they'd keep getting conned. Some people never learn. Because of centuries of Confucianism, people were hardwired to obey people like Aunt Lin, who represented the neighborhood committee. Aunt Lin would keep fleecing them, layer by layer. Zhang Yi stroked his chin. "What if I posted this to the group? What would happen then?" A smirk played on his lips. "It would be epic." So, he hit the record button. When Chen Zhenghao and his crew got to Aunt Lin's door, they started banging and yelling for her to open up. Yuelu community was a decent place, and everyone had security doors, but as everyone knew, security doors were only as good as stopping amateur thieves, not serious attacks. Aunt Lin's place wasn't like Zhang Yi's fortress, though it was obvious she was trying to hold the doors shut. The lock wasn't going to stop a gang of angry thugs. They went to work on it with baseball bats, steel rods, and crowbars, and the lock gave way fast. It was clear this wasn't their first rodeo with the lock broken. The table and sofa Aunt Lin had used to barricade the door weren't going to stop them. Through the camera, Zhang Yi saw the look of terror on Aunt Lin's pale face. Chapter 27 Fly Kick Lin Xiaohu. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Soon, Zhang Yi heard Aunt Lin's ear-piercing screams. Chen Zhenghao barged into the room and slapped Aunt Lin across the face. "You old bat, scamming our neighbors out of their supplies. I'm bringing you justice." Chen Zhenghao cackled. Aunt Lin crumpled to the floor, dazed and speechless after the blow. Chen Zhenghao barked at his crew, "Search the place. We're taking every scrap of food and drink. It's all stuff she swindled from the neighbors, and we ain't letting her profit." His buddies chuckled and winked, fanning out through the kitchen and bedrooms, tearing apart the place for hidden goodies. Before long, they'd unearthed a stash of instant noodles, bread, cookies, bottled water, and more. Aunt Lin, sobbing, crawled to Chen Zhenghao, clutching his leg. "Don't take everything. We got our own stash too. If you take it all, how are my grandson and I gonna survive?" Chen Zhenghao glared down, sneering. "Not my problem. Get lost." He punctuated the sentence with a kick from his good leg, catching Aunt Lin square in the face. "Ag!" Aunt Lin howled, flopping backward. Suddenly, a shout erupted from the bedroom. "Get out of here, you creeps!" It was Aunt Lin's grandson, Xiaohu, his eyes blazing red. He'd discovered they'd found his secret stash of chocolate cookies. He grabbed a paring knife from the drawer and stabbed one of Chen Zhenghao's goons, nicknamed Fifth, in the butt. In this frigid weather, any wound was potentially deadly. Fifth yelped. He spun around, saw it was a kid, and his rage went nuclear. Crap, he thought. If word gets out, I'm toast. You little punk. Fifth, losing it, hammered a kick into Xiaohu's stomach with all his might. No 6-year-old could withstand that kind of force, Xiaohu shrieked, sailing through the air to slam into the wall like a discarded rag doll, then sliding to the floor. It was a perfect example of a brutal knockout, so much so that Chen Zhenghao and the others roared with laughter. Ha ha ha. Fifth, when did you get such a killer leg? Sent that brat flying. Awesome. Fifth, preening, yanked the knife from his rear. Smooth, huh? You shoulda snapped a photo of that. Aunt Lin, already injured, had been playing possum on the floor, but seeing her precious grandson get pulverized, she wailed, Xiaohu. My baby. She lurched toward Xiaohu. Chen Zhenghao pointed at Aunt Lin, sanctimoniously announcing, this is what you get for ripping off your neighbors. I'm doing what's right. Then, laughing, they carted their loot out of Aunt Lin's place. Zhang Yi watched the cruel scene, raising an eyebrow. Seeing the despicable Aunt Lin's family get their comeuppance pleased Zhang Yi immensely. He felt zero sympathy for them, but this scene also signaled that the building's fragile social order was fracturing. Things were about to get a whole lot uglier. Once the ice cracked in one spot, the fissures would spread fast. Oh well, not really my problem. Kind of boring watching them fight to the death over scraps, while I'm just chilling here. Zhang Yi sighed, smiling, from his imported sofa. Later, he uploaded the video he'd captured to the building's resident group chat. The scammed residents were still tearing into Aunt Lin. Then, they saw Zhang Yi's video. The video showed Chen Zhenghao's crew ransacking Aunt Lin's place, then beating her and her grandson before swiping all their ill-gotten gains. The residents went wild. Ha ha ha, serves you right, you lying sack. Way to go, brother Hao. That's the only way to deal with scum like her. That's the price of being a con artist. Ha! The scammer got scammed. What a joke. Even though they knew they'd never see their supplies again, they reveled in Aunt Lin's beatdown. Suddenly, Chen Zhenghao was being hailed as a hero. Brother Hao is the man. Just like a real gangster, he really has a strong sense of justice. If it wasn't for Brother Hao, there's nothing we could do with her. Hey, Brother Hao, be careful. That old bat is ruthless. She might call the cops on you. Some were even worried about Chen Zhenghao and offered advice. Chen Zhenghao had become a local hero and had secured himself a pile of extra supplies. Zhang Yi watched the chat, sneering and shaking his head. These residents were missing the bigger picture. Chen Zhenghao could break into Aunt Lin's place and rob her today, but he could also break into theirs tomorrow, and as people lost hope in everything outside, that day would come sooner than they thought. The fact that the residents were still chatting freely in the group chat revealed something important. Everyone actually had a certain amount of supplies. Most families weren't as destitute as they claimed. A lot of people in the community worked in the warehouse district and had a habit of hoarding. Even if they didn't, they'd snap up discounted goods whenever they could and squirrel them away. A box of instant noodles could keep a family of 3 alive for 4 or 5 days. So, things were tough, but not hopeless. If they rationed carefully, they could survive for a while. In his previous life, Zhang Yi had lasted a whole month before his ravenous neighbors came banging on his door, ready to tear him apart for his supplies. Don't flaunt your wealth. Everyone understood that the reason they were all crying poor was because they were afraid someone would ask to borrow something. Of course, they were just trying to survive. Luxury was a distant memory. Zhang Yi stopped reading the chat. He pulled a target out of his safe and set it up on the wall. Then, he grabbed his hand crossbow and compound bow and started practicing his archery. Even with his steel fortress, he couldn't afford to slack off. Only by honing his survival skills every day could he hope to make it to the end. Besides, target practice was a good way to pass the time. As for guns, he didn't need to practice. He had a membership at the Design Association and knew how to use firearms. He wasn't exactly a sharpshooter, but just holding a gun was a serious deterrent. He only had a few rounds of ammo, and unlike arrows, they couldn't be reused, so he had to conserve them. Chapter 28 1 yuan for a pack of instant noodles. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Aunt Lin got her family's supplies stolen by Chen Zhenghao, and he even beat her and her grandson, Xiaohu. The old woman was gasping for breath, but she could still move. Xiaohu, though, took a brutal kick to the gut from Chen Zhenghao's little punk. The 6-year-old couldn't handle that kind of abuse. Something went wrong inside. Desperate, she pleaded for help in the community group, hoping someone would save her grandson, but because of her past scams involving supplies, nobody liked her, and nobody was willing to lend a hand. Please, someone. Help. He's just a kid, please save him. Aunt Lin sobbed in the group, her voice laced with despair. The other residents had no sympathy, someone even laughed. Who knows if she's telling the truth this time? Yeah, and besides, we're not doctors, what can we do? If you hadn't lied to everyone about the supplies, would Brother Hao have roughed up your grandson? You brought this on yourself. Aunt Lin broke down, wailing, it's all my fault, 1,000,000 times over. Just save my grandson, I'll grovel to you. Then, a woman named Zhou Kur sent a message. I'll take a look at the kid. But I can't promise anything. When Zhang Yi saw Zhou Kur's message, he immediately pictured her, a tall, proud, ponytail-swinging sister. Zhou Kur was a doctor at Tianhai City's #1 People's Hospital. In the previous timeline, she used her medical skills to help a lot of people. She was one of the few genuinely good people in the neighborhood. She usually kept to herself and didn't chat much in the group, but this time, seeing Xiaohu's life hanging in the balance, she spoke up. Aunt Lin remembered that there was a doctor in the building and quickly rushed the child to her, overflowing with gratitude. Half an hour later, Aunt Lin's frantic voice rang out in the group again. Does anyone have any hemostatic drugs, anti-shock meds, or antibiotics? My little tiger needs surgery, please help. I'm begging you. Lin Xiaohu was in bad shape. That kick had ruptured his liver. Even though Zhou Kur was a doctor, she didn't have all the necessary medications at home. When the other residents heard Aunt Lin's desperate plea, they just smiled and kept quiet. Seriously? Nobody keeps those drugs at home. Chen Zhenghao kept the taunts coming in the group. How are you gonna grovel? Do it in the group. A wave of ha-ha-ha laughter followed. Aunt Lin's voice was choked with tears. I'll grovel right now, if it'll help. Zhang Yi raised an eyebrow. He happened to have all those drugs in his pocket dimension, but there was no way he was pulling them out to save Lin Xiaohu. In the apocalypse, medicine was as precious as food, and he wasn't about to expose that. Besides, he genuinely hated Aunt Lin and that spoiled brat of hers, and with an injury that severe, even if the kid pulled through, he wouldn't survive the long winter. Better to save those drugs for himself. No matter how Aunt Lin begged in the group, nobody stepped up to help. Finally, Dr. Zhou Kur sent a message in the group. She'd managed to stabilize Lin Xiaohu for now, but it was just a temporary fix and wouldn't last. He needed surgery at the hospital to survive. She added that if anyone encountered an emergency, she would do what she could to help. Then came the avalanche of praise. Even Chen Zhenghao and the rich kid Su Hao offered their compliments to Zhou Kur, praising her compassion. Usually, nobody gave this cold doctor much attention, but now, everyone was scared of dying, so they were trying their best to get on Zhou Kur's good side. Zhang Yi still didn't say anything in the chat, but he kept an eye on how things were unfolding. Fang Yuqing hadn't contacted him in the last few days. Zhang Yi was happy to have some peace, but he knew that this white lotus would come crawling to him soon enough. She wasn't looking for him now because she was trying to hold on to her pathetic pride, acting like she was too good to beg a man for help. Unless he was rich, of course. But what about later? The heavy snow kept falling, and the entire first floor was completely submerged. Forget leaving the complex, you couldn't even get out of the building with 4 or 5 meters of snow in the way. Supplies would inevitably run out. At that point, someone with Bai Lianhua's personality would definitely come begging Zhang Yi for help. A week had passed since the start of the apocalypse. 7 days wasn't long, but for a group of people stuck at home, shivering in the cold, it felt like 7 years. At first, they'd been hopeful. Now, almost everyone was facing reality. The odds of rescue were slim to none. They'd seen online that the whole world was dealing with a massive blizzard, the worst in centuries. The entire planet was covered in snow, and in some northern cities, the temperature had dropped below -150 degrees Fahrenheit, with even more snow and many cities entirely submerged. The authorities were still trying to boost morale, urging everyone to band together and help each other get through it. but with the frozen city outside, everyone's hopes were dwindling, and as supplies ran low, the problems were getting worse. Chen Zhanghao had stolen all the food in Aunt Lin's house, and with her grandson dying in bed, she was losing her mind. She ranted and raved in the group all day long, claiming she was the head of the building committee and demanding that everyone give her their supplies. But by now, everyone had wised up, and nobody paid her any attention. Then, in the owner group, Xiaohu, a mother from the 12th floor, sent a message. Does anyone have any food at home? My child and I haven't eaten in 2 days. I can pay a lot for it. This message started a chain reaction in the group. Before, everyone thought the disaster would pass quickly, and the city would be unblocked soon, so, even though food was being sold, the prices were only a few times higher than usual. But now, more and more people were running out of food. At this point, food was life, it was hope. Not long after, someone said, I've got a few packs of instant noodles left. I'll sell them to you if you want them. But it'll be $1,000 a pack, $1,000 for a pack of instant noodles. That was unthinkable before. Maybe none of them realized that this transaction would have such a big impact on the whole building. Zhang Yi rested his chin on his hand, looking at his phone, and said quietly, this is where things get interesting. Xiaohu didn't reply. She was probably still hesitant. At least for now, people were still clinging to the hope that the snowstorm would pass. When that happened, people would need to live their lives and make a living. Then, Xiaohu, the rich kid who hadn't said anything in a while, suddenly popped up. I'll pay $2,000 a pack. I want everything you've got. Chapter 29 Day. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The rich kid, Lianhua's words sent the entire chat group into a frenzy. Wait, $2,000 for a pack of ramen. Did I just hear that right? Whoa, easy with the price gouging. This is getting scary. Someone chimed in, their voice trembling, the snow's gotta stop eventually, right? This is seriously unnecessary. You could hear the panic in their voice. Everyone was still holding on to hope, waking up each morning, desperate to see the snow gone, the sun shining, and life back to normal. But then treasure mom Xiaohu and rich kid Chenhao started buying up food at insane prices, and that just snapped whatever fragile thread they were hanging onto. Someone tried to play it cool, 2,000 for ramen. Come on, you'd think it was the end of the world. It's just a bit of snow. Winter came a little early. Relax, it's not like we're under siege by zombies. Zhang Yi smirked when he saw the messages and shook his head. Zombie siege? Don't even compare that low-rent horror to this ice apocalypse. Zombies are scary, sure, but people can fight back. Natural disasters, though. Humans are nothing, just bugs against the power of the universe. They have no clue what kind of nightmare they're really facing. Xiaohu boasted in the group. Chill out, people. I got money, and I'm buying some peace of mind, alright? If you wanna sell, hit me up privately. If not, whatever. Xiaohu was playing it cool, but Zhang Yi saw right through him. That indifference was just a mask. Dude was already scared. Otherwise, he wouldn't be offering $2,000 for a pack of ramen. It wasn't hard to figure out. Xiaohu may be loaded, worth millions, but in the apocalypse, all that money doesn't buy you takeout, let alone the high life. Rich people might not be nice, but they're definitely not dumb. He was starting to get how bad things were, so he was trying to buy up supplies from everyone. Treasure mom Xiaohu freaked out. How could you do this? We're out of food. This is about survival. Xiaohu shrugged. I'm not stopping you. I'm just offering more. People can sell to whoever they want, right? Not my problem. Seeing that Xiaohu wasn't backing down, Xiaohu started crying in the group. Someone, please help us. My daughter's only 9 months old. I have nothing to feed her, so I have no milk for her. We're both gonna starve. Crickets. That's all she got. The selfish side of human nature was on full display. Xiaohu was offering $2,000 for a pack of ramen. Xiaohu was paying half of that. The average salary in Tianhai City was maybe $5,000. Nobody was going to sell their hard-earned stash to her for peanuts. Most people had already started hitting up Xiaohu in private, making deals. Xiaohu seemed to realize what was happening and kept crying in the group, begging for help, still nothing. Not even a hang in there. Nobody wanted to say anything in case Xiaohu thought they were a soft touch and tried to guilt-trip them. The poor mom wailed in despair. She had a 9-month-old baby to care for, and she was struggling just to take care of herself, let alone a baby who needed her. Zhang Yi flashed back to the Xiaohu he remembered from his past life. He didn't remember her that well, because she mostly played the helpless mom card. She used it to get sympathy and score supplies to survive, but something was weird. He remembered that she and her daughter had made it through all right. That made Zhang Yi's eyes widen. She was definitely not as simple as she seemed. That sweet exterior hid a dark core. She probably weaseled her way into some kind of deal later. Zhang Yi knew that playing the Virgin Mary in the apocalypse was a death sentence, so he stayed quiet and watched Xiaohu's meltdown. Too many people died in the apocalypse. He was just trying to survive. Everyone else could kick rocks. Eventually, Xiaohu's crying worked, though. The security guard with a soft spot, finally agreed to give her some food. Xiaohu was super grateful, promising she'd never forget his kindness. Zhang Yi saw through the security cameras that Xiaohu had managed to buy up supplies from a bunch of neighbors, thanks to his deep pockets. Not a ton, but enough for him and his girlfriend to get by for a few weeks. Zhang Yi scoffed. That's the last hurrah for money in the apocalypse. It wouldn't be long before people realized that money was toilet paper and that supplies were king. Then, he figured, a lot of people would be kicking themselves for selling out. Xiaohu had really started something in the building since a lot of owners in the 25-unit building were friends or colleagues. Xiaohu's spending spree had rippled through the whole community. Once he started flashing the cash, everyone realized how scarce supplies really were. Now everyone was hoarding what they had like it was Fort Knox at the start of the snowstorm. People were sharing a little, trading with neighbors. Now, they were stingier than Ebenezer Scrooge. Even if their best friend asked for a cup of sugar, they'd come up with some excuse to say no. Ice Apocalypse, Day 10. Fang Yuqing and Lin Caning's place. Their supplies were almost gone. These two used to be so picky, only eating the best of the best, and now they were fighting over a pack of ramen. All they had left was the food they'd bought before and whatever Zhou Peng, the simp, had brought them. At this rate, they'd starve to death in a week, tops. They sat on the couch, wrapped in blankets, looking pale and miserable. A sealed package of compressed biscuits sat on the coffee table in front of them. Lin Canning glanced at the biscuits and said, "Yuqing, this is our last pack." Fang Yuqing looked like she was in agony. Normally, she wouldn't let that kind of gross food anywhere near her. Now, she was eating every crumb, even picking up the pieces that fell on the floor. Chapter 30. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Lin Canning continued, "We've got 5 packs of those crunchy noodles and 3 packs of ramen left. Half a bottle of lao gan ma in the kitchen, but the steamed buns and dried noodles are long gone." Fang Yuqing clutched her head, clearly stressed. Crunchy noodles, crunchy noodles. You're always eating that junk. Lin Canning stared at her. "Yuqing, something's really wrong outside. Do you think this snow is ever going to stop?" Fang Yuqing froze, then turned to stare blankly out the window. Through the frosted glass, she could just make out the endless swirl of falling snow. It had been 10 days of non-stop snowfall. The second floor was completely buried, making it impossible to get out. The distant streets were eerily silent, no sign of government snowplows. Fang Yuqing's heart sank. She felt utterly hopeless. How long would this storm last? Would it ever end? Fang Yuqing covered her eyes and sobbed, "Ningning, what are we going to do? We're going to starve to death." Lin Canning gritted her teeth and asked, "Does Zhou Peng have any food?" Fang Yuqing shook her head. "I've asked him a few times, even tried to flirt a little. But I've already squeezed him dry. He's got nothing left. The last 2 packs of ramen he gave me were his last. He's as skinny as a zombie now. He definitely doesn't have anything." Lin Canning clenched her fist in frustration. "Then, is there anyone else we could try? I mean, we're both pretty attractive. Surely there's some guy out there willing to help us out." Fang Yuqing glanced at her, annoyed. "Are you kidding? People are treating supplies like gold right now. Even if they're into us, there's no way they're just going to hand over their food. Plus, it's so cold, even if we offered them freebies, they probably wouldn't even be able to perform. A flicker of pain crossed Fang Yuqing's face as she said this. Lin Canning didn't know that Fang Yuqing had already tried that tactic. She'd tried using her looks to barter with men for supplies. The problem was, her standards were too high. She wanted someone over 6 feet tall, a government worker, making a decent living before she'd even consider reciprocating. Even the 60-year-old neighbor said, "You're too late. If you'd come by a couple of weeks ago, maybe I could still manage something." Lin Canning bit her lip, feeling a surge of fear. As a good-looking woman, she'd always thought of her looks as her ultimate survival tool, but apparently, the cold weather was a pretty good cure for lust. Suddenly, the image of a man popped into her head. She said to Fang Yuqing, "Hey, Yuqing. Have you forgotten you have a simp?" Of course, Fang Yuqing knew who Lin Canning meant. She pursed her lips stubbornly. "Ugh, that loser. I am not going to reach out to him unless he comes crawling back, begging for my forgiveness." She'd approached Zhang Yi a few times before, hoping he'd take the bait and bring her supplies to win her over, but Zhang Yi had been cold and even sent photos to mess with her. This really ticked Fang Yuqing off, and she'd sworn she'd make Zhang Yi eat out of her hand. She wasn't about to contact him now. That would ruin her Ice Queen image. No way. Absolutely not. If her image got ruined, how was she ever going to snag a rich guy? Lin Canning said, "Don't forget, Zhang Yi's family stocked up on a ton of food before this all started. Even after a month, they've got to have more than the average family. If you go find him, he'll definitely promise to bring you food right away." Fang Yuqing perked up at the mention of food, but she hesitated. "But he was so distant when I tried to talk to him before." Lin Canning said, "You're so dense. He probably thinks he's not good enough for you and he's giving up. After all, you were pretty cold to him for a while there." Fang Yuqing immediately perked up. "Figures. He's just some wannabe rich guy trying to act like he's got it all going on. Making me waste all this energy." Lin Canning smiled. "But he's a perfect backup plan now. Isn't the point of a backup plan to be there when you need them? Just give him a little smile, give him a little hope, and he'll be giving you whatever you want."